Welcome to the Impact Nations podcast. My name is Tim. I am your host. I am joined today, as always, by Dad. Well, I call him Dad. You can call him Steve. But today we have frequent collaborator, friend of the show, Dr. Bradley Jersak joining us. Hello, Brad. How are you?
Hey, good to be back. Good to see your faces.
Indeed. It's good to be seen.
Yeah.
Dad, you were speaking last week on God is Love. And we thought Brad might agree with that sentiment, so we thought we might have him just come on and just, if you could just kind of give us a thumbs up, Brad, and just say, "Yep, I agree," and then I think we can call it a show. Yeah.
It's been
Two thumbs up.
All right.
Two thumbs.
Hey, we got two episodes.
There we go. Done. Well, we'll let you elaborate for a few minutes, perhaps, Brad. But for those who were with us at the Beautiful Gospel Conference earlier this year, Brad actually opened with an incredible session on this very theme, God is love. And one of the things that you really stressed during that time, and I'm hoping you could just kind of reiterate a little bit here, Brad, is this concept that it's not God is love, but also God is, and we've got lots of different adjectives to fill in the blank, but instead, God is love, period. And so I wondered if you could just elaborate on that for a few minutes for us. Maybe you can tell us a few of the other things that people like to say, yeah, but he's also this, and tell us why it's really important that we just put a period at the end of that sentence like John did.
Yeah, well, there's a reason, because John did. You know? But also, throughout the scriptures, we hear the Lord is this and that he's holy, that he's righteous, that he's compassionate, that he's just, that he's merciful, and so on, right? And so, yeah, we understand that the scriptures identify many attributes with God. Think about that word attributes. Things I attribute to God based in my experience and based in revelation. But we come to the epistle of 1 John, and he has all these scriptures, he has all this revelation, and he has his direct experience of Jesus. And on top of that, he's got another 30 years of fellowship with Christ through the Holy Spirit after Peter and James and Paul and the others are dead, And it's not like he's just thinking about it for 30 more years. He's seeing the implications, he's praying about it, and he's receiving this download from heaven about who is God and what has Jesus revealed about him. And so when we come to 1 John and he says God is love, it seems to me that he's now identifying the very essence and nature of this one. And when we say essence or nature, we are talking about the, like essential oils. When you distill something down to its purest form, that John sees that distillation through Jesus Christ, crucified and risen, as love. Now, I can attribute things to that love too. I often talk about it's self-giving love, radically forgiving love, co-suffering love, and so on. But those are facets of the love, as are all of the attributes of God. So I would say every attribute of God must be identified as a facet of that one pure diamond of love. Now, what that does for us then is it helps us to understand what holiness, righteousness, and justice mean. It's holy love, righteous love, just love. But when I say God is love, I will often have people give the rejoinder, well, he's love, but he's also just. What have we done there? We've set righteousness or justice or holiness, whatever your favorite but also is, as over against love, somehow in contrast to it or even contradiction to it. And it's almost like we're saying, well, he's part love and he's part holy. To me, this is now you're straying far away from nature and essence. And in fact, what we know from history and from the four Gospels is that when you conceive of a kind of God who is holy and righteous and just as over against love, you will crucify the Son of God. I mean, this is what the Pharisees did. They set these attributes in a way that countered love. And one very clear example of how Jesus brings it all together is in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "Be holy," or "Be perfect. Be perfect as my heavenly Father is perfect." But then he identifies that as indiscriminate kindness and hospitality, and he starts describing the way God loves the stranger. Um, so, so we wouldn't say, "Well, God is love, but He's also perfect." We're like, no, this is what perfection looks like. Compassion and mercy, and is what holiness and justice looks like. These are all then meant to be adjectives of love, and when they are somehow divorced from love as if they're their own things, then they become, well, their shadows come out as toxic religiosity and self-righteousness and so on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. So if we could, let's get a little bit more nitty gritty here and maybe zero in on one of those that we often hear, which is, but he's also the judge. He is coming to judge the living and the dead. God is, he is the judge. And how do we then take judge and put it to the beginning to make that a facet of love rather than something pitted against love?
Yeah, very good. So, I would say it this way, that the judgments of God are serve His very nature and express it. So, what would be the expression of perfect love to the one from the one sitting on the judgment seat? I believe that Christ alone should sit on the judgment seat because He's the only judge we can trust who will consistently render the verdict of mercy. And mercy is how we experience the nature of God as judge. So think verdict, think he's the best one. And so when my conscience is condemning me, it has displaced Christ on His throne, and it has ascended now to the judgment seat, and it is serving the ministry of the accuser and the condemner. So for God to be a loving judge, or a judge that His judgments are love, that completely washes out retribution, condemnation, accusation, things that the scriptures themselves identify with Satan. And so that's how I would see it. So we have that His judgments are restorative rather than retributive. How do we know this? Because God is love. And let's just add one more powerful thing from the tradition, that He ascended to His judgment seat, and that judgment seat was the cross. And on that cross, He prays, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." And so He exercises his role as from the judgment seat of the cross as intercession for the salvation of all, for forgiveness, for reconciliation, even those who are His enemies, even those who are ignorant, even those who are still bound up in their sin. And we've hammered away at Romans 5 in the past, that this is a very important aspect of it, that these judgments are issued before the fact, from the cross itself. And we could even say from all eternity, in that He's the Lamb slain from the foundations of the earth. And so if we can think about the throne of grace, or the judgment seat of Christ, is the cross, and not just two pieces of wood on Good Friday, but that which Christ reveals about His Father by the way that He dies, that He's all merciful, and that His mercy triumphs over judgment. And so in that sense, that's one way, that's how James talks about it, but we might also say his judgments are mercy. What's your verdict, Tim? Your verdict is okay. Tim gets the verdict of mercy. Well, it's a good thing Jesus was on the judgment seat, because he has overcome the accuser in that sense.
Yeah, John focuses on that in the letter. That very issue you brought up of when our conscience tries to accuse us, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus.
Yeah. Even if our hearts condemn us,
Yep.
God is greater than our hearts.
Yeah.
Yes. That's it. That's it.
That's right there in that book, isn't it?
What do
And
you
then
know?
what happens? Perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. So this is what we're expecting. We're used to coming before a judgment seat where there's not only a verdict but a sentence, and that sentence is death, or that sentence is punishment. And what Jesus Christ reveals about his Father is that perfect love drives out those fears because it takes that um, accusation, condemnation um, off the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, Brad, you mentioned Romans 5, so I want to dig into it just a little bit more, specifically on the issue of wrath.
Yeah.
Romans 5, famously, a lot of the English translations in verse 9 insert uh, God's name in front of wrath or condemnation, where it's not actually there in the original Greek. They're kind of reading into the text a little bit. And so I wondered if you could just speak for a moment to this concept of God's wrath and where it, how do we juxtapose God's wrath, or how do we fit it inside of this lens of God is love, full stop. Is there such
Yep.
a thing as God's wrath?
There sure is. But how that is defined develops throughout the scriptures. So I'll just quickly race through some of that development.
Mm-hmm.
We need to define what wrath means literally, and then think about how God relates to that. Wrath is not just anger, it is anger expressed as violence, where the violence is defined as doing harm. That's what wrath is. So genuine wrath looks like violent anger harming someone. Now, there are, early in the history of the people of God, they knew that God would give them warnings, right? And let's say he would warn them, don't do this thing, or that bad thing will happen. So they would do that thing and the bad thing that would happen. And sometimes that bad thing was violent and painful and harmful. And because God warned them in the first place and they were disobeying him, they assigned the consequences, that harmful violence, to God as if he did it. Later, as we'll find out, they start to realize that's a mistake. But I use the analogy of my mom warned me not to touch the stove when I was a little boy. She said that the elements are hot, and if you touch them, they will burn you. And then, probably on the same day, I saw that the elements had gone from red back to black, and I inferred that they were no longer hot. And so I touched them, and I burnt myself. And it was very odd. I had the very same first reaction that Adam and Eve had. I went and hid. Now, if I would have run immediately to my mother, she would have put my hands under the cold tap and left them there for 5 or 10 minutes, and the burns wouldn't have gone so deep. But because in my shame I was hiding, now I'm experiencing the consequences of my sin in a very harmful way. Even then, I didn't infer that my mother had burnt me. I wasn't that dumb. I did think maybe there would be punishment on top of it or something. I don't know. I think it was more visceral than that. We just have an instinct to hide when shame comes up. But in the ancient world, they really attributed the consequences to the one who gave the warning. So if God says, don't forget me, or you'll end up worshiping idols and making contracts with nations, and that will cause other nations to be angry, and they'll come and destroy your city. When they would describe their story playing out, it's like God destroyed their city. This was God's wrath. Oh, That's not quite fair, is it? So then later in the prophets, they begin to distinguish God from the consequences. And they understand that when we defy God, that he doesn't strap us to a gurney. He allows us to exercise our defiance and experience the consequences. And the language they use for that is giving over.
Yeah.
He gave them over. And that's then becomes what wrath is. And it fits into the whole love of God system. Ezekiel talks about this in chapter 14, but I'll paraphrase it. It's like if you want to pursue an idol and you say, God, I want this idol, it's like you'll even hear him say yes, because your ears will project the yes, right? And then it says, and then you will stumble over that idol. You'll fall flat in your face, you'll break your nose, and then you'll bottom out and you'll turn back to him voluntarily. Now, if you had just said yes involuntarily, that's not love.
Yeah.
And we would probably carry resentment like the elder son for obeying not out of love. And so he says, so look at, if you defy me, I'm not going to prevent you from experiencing the consequences of your defiance. We get to Romans chapter 1, and this is the language he uses, that he gave them over. He gave them over. He gave them over. And this is then how the wrath of God is defined as us experiencing what he gives us over to. But then chapter 2, immediately it's like, but hang on, remember, the kindness of God leads to repentance. In other words, turning back to him after we've experienced these consequences. So that's one way we can think about the wrath of God. It's very similar to then like the prodigal son story. What is the wrath of God in the prodigal son story? It's his consent to the younger son going and wasting his money and ending up in a pig pen. And he allows him to do that as a loving father, but when the prodigal son comes home, it's because he wants to. And that this will be a reconciliation into a love relationship rather than just a slave thing. But I will add this, that Romans seems to be a conversation between Paul and some opponents, and they're both using an Old Testament text called Wisdom of Solomon. And his opponents seem to be using Wisdom of Solomon to say, look at God. God is angry and wrathful, and he's a punisher, and he pays back sinners. And what Paul does, he picks up on this, and he's responding back with their own texts. And one of those texts is in chapter 18, and it says this, that Aaron is a type of Christ, and that Aaron is prefiguring the Messiah who will come to destroy the destroyer and overcome the wrath. From then on, wrath often in the rabbis is a synonym for the devil. So in Romans 5, when Paul says Christ came to save us from the wrath, it's really intrusive to throw in of God there. Yeah. No, he's come to save us from the wrath, to overcome the wrath, to destroy the destroyer, to drive out the enemy. And there's another sense in which he saves us from the consequences of our sin through forgiveness and restoration. Yeah. And so, as George MacDonald would say, he doesn't want to just forgive your sins. He wants to save you from them. Yeah. He wants to free you from them. He wants to release you from not only the sin, but the consequences of it as we draw near to him. And so you can see how then through the Bible, you have this idea of wrath developing away from God's direct violent anger into the very thing that Christ has come to save us from. And it's not his Father.
Yeah.
I wrote an article once called, "When is Wrath God's?" And that is, the consequences of our sin become God's when he co-opts them for our restoration. So he lets the prodigal son smell how bad the pig pen is.
Yeah.
To co-opt those consequences as a way to draw him home where the banqueting table smells so much better. That doesn't mean God sent him to the pig pen. God consented to him going there,
Yeah.
but he then uses that to bring him home.
Yeah. I'm guessing that in your history of working with addicts who are looking to recover, I'm guessing that you have seen that firsthand, just in terms of, we use the term rock bottom. People who have hit rock bottom and as a result have then discovered freedom in Christ by changing the way they think, discovering that abundant life in Christ. But probably, my guess is they would attribute rock bottom to that final decision to turn. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tim. So, some people think rock bottom means you have to go. It has to get as bad as it can get. And no, it doesn't. Rock bottom is any moment that your eyes are open and you go, "What am I doing?" And you surrender to the care of God. Now, for some people, that will happen the very first time they stumble over sin. They're like, "What am I doing?" And that's their bottom. Others, they need to go through five marriages and and lose their business, and maybe have to be revived by paramedics, and then they surrender. So whatever your point of surrender is, that's what we would call bottom. And now here's the amazing thing about that is, the veterans in recovery are grateful for their addictions. They say and they think about that worst thing that ever happened to them as a result of their addictions, and they will make this statement sometimes: the worst thing that ever happened to me was the best thing that ever happened to me, because God was not just freeing them from their addictions, but he was inside the addictions, he was freeing them from self-will, which is the real nature of the problem. Yeah. Going back to the garden, right? I want to do it my way. I'm already like God, but I want to be God myself. And so God's like, okay, I guess love will consent to that, but it'll also restore you when you've had enough. Yeah. By the way, I feel clever this week because I found this great Russian proverb, and I've done a PS to it. So the Russian proverb is this: when you think you've bottomed out, you will hear a knock from below. and then my PS is, and it's Jesus knocking. So he'll come in, he's descended into Hades, right? He's come down to the very bottom, and when we hit bottom, he's already under us with his hands and or knocking and say, now do you need another round, or shall we ascend together now?
Shall we ascend together? Oh, it's beautiful.
Psalm 139. No matter where I go, we're back to the gospel and chairs. No matter where I go, oh, you're here too.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, I've got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
We've all been confronted, probably multiple times, with God is love, but he's also. Multiple times. We have a friend who just showed Your God is Love session from the Beautiful Gospel, and he had two people who, as soon as it was done, they put their hand up, and then when it was done, they pursued it. But God is love, and they never came back. Why? What do you think is at the root? I've got a few thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours. What do you think is at the root of that deeply ingrained argument that we confront?
I can think of a few layers, but I think what they all have in common is going to be a fear. If we say that God is love, period, then people will go crazy and they will and so there's this worry that this will become a license to sin and so on. And as Martin Lloyd-Jones said in his commentary, when you get through the end of Romans 5 into Romans 6, if that objection doesn't come up, you have not preached the grace of God. He says, for your gospel to be the gospel that Paul preached, someone must say, what, shall we continue sinning that grace may abound? And we go, well, of course not. You don't get it, do you? We've died with him, so we rise with him, and this affects our real life, which is Romans 6. And so, so first of all, I'm identifying that objection with the same kind of resistance Paul faced, and I think that in Romans he names what the fear is, that people who believe in grace, who believe in the mercy of God that endures forever, that God is love but nothing, and that there's not a retributive bone in his beautiful body, that if we come to that will not be sufficient to help us grow in Christ. We need to add a little fear of punishment, which is First John, I think the reason, First John doesn't come from nowhere. He's probably having to address that himself. And so I know Origen, he kind of talks this way. It's like, what? Sometimes the immature, they don't respond to love. They just respond to the whip. So it's hard. It's a hard message for them because they will use it as license. It really does happen. I'm like, yeah, okay, but what, are we going to change our gospel for that? Better that we do what God does. And that is this: God the Father takes a calculated risk that his generosity will lead to license, and that he will consent to that, and those people will fall over their idols, and they will smell the pig pen, and they will come back willingly. That's the calculated risk he's willing to make because he's able to restore all things. So we don't see God saying, well, I better give them a few chapters on grace, but then I'm gonna, pummel them. That's not to say he doesn't make dire warnings about consequences, but it's only ever as a loving father, and he says so. So he's clear, like this is Hebrews 12, that like whatever crises you face, if you're going to read God into them, only read a loving father into them with the end game, which he says explicitly, is to strengthen your knees and hold up your hands and renew you. That's not retribution, because retribution is just about doing harm.
Yeah.
Through wrath.
Yeah. Last week, Dad, you spent some time talking about atonement and taught us a new Greek word, hilasterion, which was used throughout the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Old Testament that Jesus and the apostles read. That was the word they used when describing the mercy seat.
Yep.
And so I'd like to just spend a few minutes talking about that with Brad. I don't know if you want to give a quick primer or anything like that, a quick review, but the word atonement is a funny word that's not used regularly in the English language. And so I think it's really important that we understand, as John has been describing atonement, what it is we're talking about.
It is interesting, and the word maybe isn't just in your everyday, but boy, it sure is in commentaries and theologically. Brad and I talked about it last week, that some very top-notch commentators, and as you know, I tend to read a lot of books to prepare, real top-notch, they sure talk about atonement a lot more than the love of God. In fact, I read you a quote from one who said, well, obviously that doesn't really mean God is love in that ontological, in that essential sense. What I said last week, of course, and I let them know that was just right from you, what I learned from you, both through some conversations and something that you wrote. I love what you did. You did it for me years ago. We were sitting somewhere in a coffee shop, and you broke down the word atonement to, as you know, at one-ment. It's about reconciliation. It's not about punishment. So I'll just get out of the way and let you talk a little bit about that, which, by the way, for me is a big part of why people say he is love, but it's the basic view we have. And I'll go one more. And we've shared this together, but a few episodes ago as we were talking, I said, one of the key litmus tests, one of the key watersheds is, did God come to punish sin or to heal it? And that goes right back to what is the nature of atonement, and that goes right back to what is the nature of God for me. And I've yet to meet someone who said to me, yes, God is love, but who didn't have a pretty, we could almost call it a judicial view of everything, of God, of the cosmos, of everything. So I was only going to say a couple of words, and here I just did 3 paragraphs, but I'll get out of the way to hear from you.
Oh, that was great. I'm enjoying it. So yeah, as Steve said, we had an atonement debate back in the day. How shall we translate this word? And so the two sides of the debate it was theological agendas weighing in on a word with their theological agendas. So it wasn't translation at all. It was interpretation, right? So propitiation was like appeasement, which we get from pagan sacrifices. And expiation was like removal or washing out, or that kind. And so those were the two, expiation and propitiation, back in the day. And then later, the NIV and other translations, that they wanted to avoid the bias there, so they talk about an atoning sacrifice, and that does sort of reflect the mercy seat. The mercy seat in the Old Testament was on the Ark of the Covenant, and it was the place of reconciliation. And that reconciliation happened through a sacrifice. So we come to the cross then, and we say, what is the nature of this atoning sacrifice? Well, now we've got a new problem, because the English word atoning used to mean reconciliation, and it slid into meaning appeasement. So we're back to the pagan view again. And it's just, we seem to be magnetized to that, whether it's Greek or English or whatever, right? Or theologically, or even in our lives. And we want sacrifice to somehow be, okay, so Jesus makes this sacrifice to appease his Father, and now we've got penal substitution. But wait, hang on a second. This is God enacting his sacrificial love to reconcile us to himself. He didn't need to be reconciled to us. He never left. We needed to be reconciled to him. And so how does that happen? Well, he comes and Jesus reveals the love of God, and we don't like it. We don't want love, period. We want love, but. And so they end up crucifying Jesus, and God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. How? Not by not counting our sins against us. What does that mean? He forgave us. And so something in us, if we're still into that old pagan transactional salvation, we want to look, but what's the mechanism? How, what's the judicial, the mechanics, the legalese that makes forgiveness possible? It's like, there is none. He is love, so he forgives you. How does he forgive you? By forgiving you. There's no contract here. It's a new covenant in the sense of relationship, a spousal relationship where God redeems his wayward bride through straight on forgiveness, because he is love. This is Hosea, right? It's not even just, this is even before Christ. He was doing this all the time. So all that to say this. So atonement means reconciliation. How are we reconciled? By God in Christ, reconciling us. How does he do it? By forgiving us, even when we murdered him. But nothing. Period, you know.
Yeah.
Now we can say, and also he destroyed death,
Death.
and
Yeah.
also he drove out the prince of this world, and also he is making all things new. But these are all that's all in the same package of love,
Yeah.
but nothing.
All right. But
So
I want to talk.
just one other thing there,
Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
very quickly. So I talked about the throne of grace, or the judgment seat of Christ is the cross.
Mm-hmm.
That's also the mercy seat.
The mercy seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, but I want to come back to, you used the word mechanism. Like, oh, yeah, but what's the mechanism? Because we want
Yeah.
that, and that brings us back to that transactional thing. But here's my, but what about?
Mm-hmm.
What happened on the cross? Like, why was the cross necessary? If he can just choose to forgive, like, was the cross not the mechanism? What, and if not, like, what was happening at the cross? Why the cross?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just think so the cross is not a legal mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a definitive revelation and a decisive victory. So I say those two things to say, yes, something happened at the cross and needed to.
Mm-hmm.
What we didn't need was a legal justification for God to be able to forgive. He had already been doing that since the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
But now the cross becomes, first of all, a definitive revelation that God is love, and that his forgiveness is universal. So it's not just for particular sins in particular people, that the cross universalizes this forgiveness to all people in all times. So that's quite a revelation, but it's also an action. Some progressives would say it's just a revelation. I'm like, oh no, something real happened there in terms of also then a victory over Satan, sin, and death, and that is the cross becomes the place where all of those lose their leverage over me. And so I should actually remind you that in the early church, and especially in Paul's writings, the cross doesn't just mean the crucifixion of Jesus on Good Friday. The cross encompasses the whole Paschal mystery, including the resurrection. So the cross isn't just an event, it's the person of Jesus Christ dying, descending into Hades, and then rising from the dead, victorious. All of that is what Paul means by the cross, because he says, I resolved to preach nothing but Christ and him crucified. But then, like, later in the same book, he goes, oh, and by the way, like, the resurrection, without the resurrection, your hope's in vain. It's like, well, so to Paul, it's all one thing. It's all part of the Passover feast, where we're freed from slavery and led out in Exodus. It's a reflection of the Exodus story, right? Including the victory and the plundering of Pharaoh's goods, which is plundering of Satan's goods, which was us. So these are important, necessary things that happen in space-time history to universalize what's always been eternally true. That he has always been a forgiver, that he has always been a savior, but this gets instantiated. That means it has to have an instance in space-time history. It's instantiated in the passion of Jesus Christ, who these eternal forms have now formed and coalesced in this event around this person. And so, why is the cross necessary? To free us from sin, to reveal God's forgiveness, to overcome the enemy, to conquer death. And I love Hebrews 2. It's like he does this so that to free us from death and the fear of death, through which the devil held us in bondage all of our lives. Well, that's quite an event. So the enemy has lost all the leverage. Yeah. And because our sin has been washed away, now we call people into the experience of that. And that's why we're still evangelists. We're saying these things are true, but we want you to experience them as true, because because it's in the experience of them that we have an abundant life. And so if we don't preach what has been done for people, they continue to live as if it hasn't been, as if God doesn't like them, or as if they're not forgiven, or as if, and if you live as if that way, that has real consequences.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Are we still on the same page, or did I?
No, we are.
We are.
Here's the
you?
problem that I have. I
Just
can't
kidding.
like I probably just make a crummy interviewer because I don't have any counterpoint to that. And I know that you have a lot of people who would disagree with you and have done so vocally in some places and rather publicly. What is the typical counter argument to that? I don't understand. To me, this is good news, and why would we argue against? I just don't understand why we would argue against this gospel.
Because, if I may,
You may.
because Anselm, late 11th century, said we've got to do something about God's honor. We've dishonored God.
What did he mean by that?
Well, it's a reflection of the Middle Ages. I used to have to teach a lot on chivalry and courtly behavior, and so
Feudalism, yeah.
within that, we've insulted God by sinning and turning our back.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to deal with that.
Yeah.
And then that evolved 400 and a bit years later, where Calvin was in a very forensic, a very judicial worldview, because Western Europe civilization, there was this incredible restructuring going on, like rapidly. And with that, we got to have laws because it's a lot more complicated. So they thought legally. So then, within that worldview, he thought, well, we've broken God's laws. And so his laws that are broken are punished, right? If you take the king's deer, you're in trouble. Laws that are broken are punished. And everybody knows that. And of course. And therefore, when we break God's laws, they have to be punished. Both of those, Anselm, honor, Calvin, justice, the judicial system, those worldviews were projected, as we're so good at doing, were projected onto God. And so that's how we went from what Anselm was saying, which was enough of a shift from the first 1,000 years, to Calvin. It wasn't that, wait a minute, I got a new idea. It was, of course. Does that make sense to you, Brad, what I've just said?
Yeah, it does. I think that that kind of courtroom worldview then gets imposed. Even it's so strong that even when you start losing the theology of it, where you're like, oh, I get it. God's not a punishing judge. He doesn't need to be appeased for his wrath. There doesn't have to be a punishment or a penalty here. Even then, we still think quite often that's what's going on in the scriptures. And so we'll think, well, okay, there is a real juridical or a judicial theme throughout Paul, because look at, he uses words like righteousness and justification. Well, what have I done there? I've assumed that righteousness and justification are legal terms, and they aren't. So, but that's how we use them so much that we thought that's what Paul meant by them. But Paul's whole vision is rooted in this a covenantal one. That's the other thing. So we thought covenant was like a legal contract. No, this is all about a husband and a wife, a spousal relationship, and that and a word like justice meant doing what's right, having a balanced society where there's equity. And how? By good laws? No, by loving your neighbor and being merciful. And to be justified is, when I justify the margins, of a book. What am I doing? I'm bringing the edges into balance. There's nothing legalese about justifying a paragraph, but in that sense, justifying a paragraph is the older meaning of this word. But so wherever, it's like Christianity itself, somehow, or at least Western Christianity, began redefining all of Paul's terms inside of a judicial framework, and that's just not what he was doing.
So, I mean, there is plenty of talk in the scriptures about the law, right? I mean, the Torah was the law. They referred to regularly the law. Jesus said, I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Mm-hmm. What did he mean when he said that?
That's a great question. The way I read that, and he says, like, not one jot or tittle will be removed until all of it. So, the first problem we have there is that the Bible uses the word law in a lot of ways. Sometimes the law means the 10 Commandments. Sometimes the law means the 5 books of Moses. In Galatians, the law just means external markers of your covenant, which are circumcision and keeping feasts. So law is slippery there. What's Jesus talking about by law in Matthew 5? Well, it seems to me and that this kind of righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. What he's doing there, he takes 5 of the laws. He makes 5 commandments, and basically says, we've got to stop just seeing these as rules that God gave us to obey externally. What we need to do is ask ourselves, what is at the heart of these laws that is an expression of who God is, i.e., love? So Jesus' summary of the whole law and the prophets is love God and love your neighbors yourself. Yeah. And so for me to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees is to say, no, I will not just restrain myself from murdering people. I will let the love of God penetrate my heart right into the place where hatred begins to form. No, I won't just sleep with my neighbor's wife. I will internalize the love at the heart of these laws right down into where lust begins to form a seed in me. Even like the oaths, he says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't take any oaths. It's like, what? So in the courtroom, I'm going to say, well, I will say I affirm instead of I vow. No, it's like, take this deep into your heart and understand oaths always represent allegiance. And any competing allegiance to the kingdom of God, I need to get at it while it's still, well, I'm just making an oath, like in my heart. So I think that's what he's doing with, you fulfill the law by seeing where the love of God is actually what generated that, their community contract. And that keeping the community contract while you're still a hateful, lustful person is not righteousness, actually. It's not transformation. And he's like, I want to do something way deeper in you guys. I want to set you free from malice that churns in you, because that's the fires of hell, and my mercy is going to douse that. So that's one point. Somehow also the cross then becomes the fulfillment of this. And so the penal substitutionary atonement, they would have said, well, yes, all sin needs to be punished, and therefore God's going to punish it in the most ultimate way on the cross in his son. And that will fulfill the law. It's like, no, it doesn't. What we see there is the love of God, which is the heart of the law, being revealed in its most radical form, and that is forgiveness. Happily, in our cultures, in your nation, even the most corrupt officials in a broken legal system now have the concept of pardon. I don't remember if they really do in Roman law, but when, let's say, when you can pardon Richard Nixon, what does that mean? It means legally he's being freed from the consequences of his lawbreaking. If that's possible in America under your system for someone like Nixon, how much more is God able to pardon sin without punishment in his perfect kingdom that is ruled entirely by love? So I love that. I think we have it in Canada too, but that America has a concept of pardon that theologians should catch up to. Like, if you're going to be judicial, include that part. So every day when I pray the Trisagion prayer, it goes like this. And you've heard me do it before. It's, O heavenly King, O Comforter, Spirit of truth, who is in all places and fills all things, treasury of good gifts and giver of life, come dwell with us. Cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O good one. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. And then we go into this section. All Holy Trinity, have mercy on us. Wash away our sins, pardon our iniquities, and heal us of our infirmities. For your name's sake, for you are a good and merciful God, and you love mankind. So this idea that washing away my sins isn't just forgiving them, it includes that, but it's also like freeing me from my addictive behaviors and all that. And then where there is guilt, it's like pardon instead of punishment. And then, oh yes, ultimately this is about getting healed. Even below my behaviors, there's a broken, disordered passions that need his healing presence. And that's so I invoke that all the time. And I'm surprised that pardon, like I hear a lot of theologians talking about he paid for our sins. Like, no, he pardoned them. I mean, it was costly because he had to suffer them himself. He suffered our sins, but that's different than saying he suffered God punishing our sins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, would you do a favor to our listeners? Could you say again the prayer that you just gave us? Could you tell us the title so they can Google it?
Yes, and of course you'll see different translations, and some will include less or more phrases, but it's Trisagion, Trisagion. You hear the word tri there.
Yeah.
So this is about the Trinity. Mm-hmm. And also Trisagion, it's a threefold, because we'll say holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us 3 times.
Okay.
Again, in the West, we took mercy as this thing of withhold your punishment, withhold your punishment, withhold your punishment. No, mercy is every manifestation of the goodness of God in every area of your life. Lord, I'm traveling today, have mercy. Lord, I'm planting crops today, have mercy. Lord, my grandson's learning to walk, have mercy. Lord, do you see what they're doing in the news? Lord, have mercy. Oh no, the fires are burning again across BC. Lord, have mercy. So whatever form goodness needs to take for our needs and our brokenness and our wounds and our crises, all of that is mercy. And a lot of it is just like pure goodness, like a sunshiny day is the mercy of God.
Well, and one of the things that I'm taking from what you've just said in the last 5 minutes is answering a question that I was going to ask earlier about that word expiation, the removal of guilt. And I'm now understanding that word is just too small for as a translation of atonement or
right.
Or
it's too small, but it's right. But it's too small.
It's right, but it's too small, because what you're describing, this ever-present mercy that is available to us in every aspect of life, is way bigger than just removal of guilt. It is something much deeper that is available to us, and if we limit our experience of the cross to simply the removal of guilt, we can miss out on so much more that was purchased for us by the blood of Christ on the cross.
Yeah, that's good. It really, I mean, it's the restoration of all things. Yeah. It is, behold, I am making all things new, not just you're dealing with your guilt and your shame, but also I'm growing you up. I'm going to bring you to your telos, your maturity, your fullness, and I'm going to transfigure you from glory to glory into the image of Jesus Christ. I mean, it's about becoming the fullness of what it is to be a human.
Yeah.
And this surely is good news, right?
Yeah, that seems like good news.
It's not transactional. It's not conditional. It's just good news.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would even, the one caution I would have there is, Tim, you used the word purchased. Well, I think that's a fair and biblical word, because we do have scriptures like, you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your bodies. It, also, the blood of God, which he, we'll have these purchase language, but we have to really hold on tight to the fact that that's a metaphor that is limited to saying he did something that gives him authority in our lives, but Paul didn't stumble into transactionalism, but we do, right? So he paid the debt, he purchased blah, 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 all of that. Those metaphors are currently more dangerous because of the transactional heresies that they get used to justify. So just to beware of that. We don't want to erase that language from our scriptures, but we need to be then mindful when we use it. Oh, he's talking about his authority in my life. He's not talking about like, well, he paid God to, or he paid Satan, or he paid, well, but what they are trying, so it's not a transactional metaphor, but it's about the costliness of this to Jesus Christ. So if we could think about, it's not about payment, but it is about cost. And that cost is that sacrificial love that he lays his life down for us. And so it would even be like, we would talk this way, if I save someone's life, they might say, I owe you my life. Well, we haven't actually done a transaction there, but it's like, well, or if I say I owe you one, it's like, well, you did me a kindness and I want to respond. I want to reciprocate. I want to love you because you've loved me. All right. You purchased that, but like you wouldn't give me an invoice.
Yeah.
And that's what we did, I think, when we theologized these metaphors through a judicial grid. We reduced them into contracts and into invoices. There's an article anyway, invoicing the gospel, and then just like object to that. One moment, I want to not have my battery die. There we go.
Well, Brad, our hour has gone flying by. I can't believe it. You mentioned an article perhaps in waiting that you need to write. I wondered if you could just tell people, you mentioned a few times today some articles that you've written and stuff. Where's the best place for people to go to read some of your writing? We've recommended your books and we'll continue to do so, but you've just got so many great kind of these short, I don't know, blogs, articles, whatever, that really lay out some of these arguments really beautifully.
Yeah, I have there's a blog section on bradjersak.com. And also if you Google Brad Jersak and Clarion, a lot of my articles are on the Clarion Journal.
Okay.
And that's a good way to search them out.
Yeah. And they're just an excellent resource.
Yeah, they are. Hey, Brad, I happen to know, because you kindly let me write an endorsement, I happen to know you got a new book coming out. You'd like to tell us a little bit about it, starting with what it's called and where folks can get it?
Sure. So we're hoping that it will be released in November, but it's already, we're taking pre-orders on Amazon now. The book is called Out of the Embers, faith after deconstruction. And what I'm doing there is I'm addressing this very popular trend in deconstruction, and I'm trying to avoid the two ditches that seem to be dominating the discussion. One ditch is, oh no, all these people are deconstructing. We need to herd them back into the churches, and argue them out of their deconstruction. I just think that that's counterproductive, and they double down on it. The other ditches were like, oh yes, deconstruction is the greatest thing in the world. It's the new conversion, and in fact, very triumphalistic. And people like it's just like people giving their testimonies. I used to be religious, and now I deconstructed, and now I'm free, and that triumphalistic side. Well, I get all the messages from people saying, I've gone through a deconstruction. I didn't choose it. And I not only lost my church, I lost my faith, I lost Jesus, I've lost meaning in life. I'm completely bereft, and I don't know what to do. So we've got those folks. And so what I'm wanting to do is say, well, look at that. For some people, deconstruction is truly liberating. And for others, it's deeply traumatic. How can we help? How can we pass through this? And I would say most kind of trendy deconstruction is kind of half-hearted. It's just enough to go play. But I'm like, these great deconstructionists like Moses and Jesus, Voltaire, Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, they went all the way. And they're like, half measures avail you nothing. And so instead of avoiding deconstruction, it's like, how about this? I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, Well, then, and where I come out in it is like, where are we going to find authentic faith after this is all, we've finished the fallout? When we've had our personal or social meltdown, and it's like, what can come out of the embers? And it's quite a miracle. And so I tell some of my messy story, and both the wonderful liberation I had through some theological reconstruction, and the devastation that I experienced and caused in my personal deconstruction, and I'm pretty vulnerable about that, because I think we need to be.
Yep.
But I also feel like I've got really good help, including people like you guys, who have walked me through, and I'm like, Jesus is such a powerful anchor to me now, and I don't say that anymore as from a naive faith, as what's his name, Chris Green in his endorsement said, this is the faith of fevers and tears. I'm like, yep, that's right.
Very good.
So you can find it on Amazon, for example. Out of the Embers, Bradley Jersak. And available for purchase now, but I don't think you'll get it until Christmas. So,
well, make a good present, because as one who's had the privilege of reading it, it is at times raw. I alluded to that in my little. It kind of shakes you up in places, but we need to be shaken up. And it's ultimately incredibly, if I say hopeful, we're back to kind of happy clappy, and it's nothing like that. But it's that, well, what we said earlier, when we're at rock bottom and we hear a knock below, that's really very much what it's about. And and so I recommend it to everyone. I thought it was a wonderful book.
Thanks, Steve.
I'm looking forward to reading it. Brad, thank you so much for being with us today. Sorry, go ahead.
My pleasure. I don't know if your name is in it this time, Tim.
Yeah, you got a whole chapter. I got bubkas.
Brad, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a pleasure as always. Folks, thank you for being with us. Thanks for listening to the podcast or watching. If you're watching, that happens on YouTube. We release every Thursday night at 6 p.m. Do be sure to both subscribe and hit that little bell so you get a notification every time the Impact Nations podcast goes up. But also, we've actually got a second podcast that goes up on there, the Restoration Conversation, plus all sorts of just really cool good news videos and stuff they're always going to. So do be sure to subscribe on YouTube and hit that bell so you get the notifications. If you like to listen, you can do that. Just subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Brad's given me the peace sign. I don't know if that means he wants to say something or if he's saying peace out, I got to go.
No, I'm saying amen.
Awesome. We are just about done our series on 1 John. I think we got one more week. And then don't worry, it's a shorter season this year compared to the 50 gazillion weeks that we did for Matthew.
56 weeks. In a row.
In a row. It turns out 1 John's just a shorter book. Who knew?
Yeah.
But don't be dismayed. As just after season 6 wraps, we've got a few more really exciting things for you as well in the weeks to come. So, but do be sure to come back next week for that last chapter of 1 John. Brad, thanks for being with us to help us just unpack some of this stuff, and I'm sure we'll see you again real soon here.
Thanks.
I hope so. Thanks, guys.
All right. God bless you, everybody. Have a great week.